Number 1, Always, by Shoto's Kettle. Read by Serenity Baby. Izuku Midoriya, the symbol of hope, number 1 in the hearts of the world. Every step it took to get to where I am in my life wasn't for nothing. The pain of being born quirkless, the pain of struggling to catch up with my old classmates back in UA. Every moment was worth it to get to the number 1 spot. I finally made it, Mom! Aren't you proud of your son? I spent years training, learning everything I could. Deku smiled out at the crowd, tears welling up in his eyes as he held his fist up high, taking in the faces of each and every person who stood looking up at him, his former classmates standing beside him under the bright stage lights. This was a place he had always dreamed of standing, here under the spotlight as the number 1 pro hero. The crowd cheering echoed through his ears almost angelic, his mind wandering as his lips moved on their own, telling the story of his life. There was so much to tell, though he had to keep some things a secret. Even with All Might and Gran Torino long gone at this point, it was his duty to keep the secrets behind One for All safe from prying ears. He would miss them, especially All Might. He wanted his mentor and greatest inspiration to see him walk up on this stage and accept his place as the new symbol of peace with his own eyes. However, All Might's frail body from all the previous fights had given out on him at an almost too young age. Gran Torino had passed not too long after All Might had been hospitalized. He slowly lowered his fist as his eyes closed, listening to the claps and cheers surrounding him. Holding the microphone up to his lips once more, he gave the people one of his signature toothy boyish grins. And that's the story of how I became the number 1 hero! He lowered the mic as he looked over at Bakugo, beaming brightly at the still very angry blonde who hadn't changed a bit since high school. Katsuki lowered the little journal down onto the podium and closed his eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath to gather himself before he continued.
Or that's how that damn nerd would have told the story.
His voice broke finally, despite the effort to keep it as steady as possible as he looked over at the picture of Deku that was placed behind a few rows of lit candles, one for each attendee.
He was reckless. He was an idiot, but for some reason everyone loved him. Everyone rooted for him as everyone lagged behind.
Katsuki slammed his hand down against the journal, squeezing his eyes shut as he shook his head.
He was always 1 step ahead. 1 big step.
When he finally opened his eyes again, the tears started to fall as Kirishima walked up to him, putting a hand against the blonde's shoulder.
Come on, man, that's enough. You obviously can't handle much more of this,
he whispered to Katsuki. He only got a shake of her head in return.
No, I was always the one lagging behind, and here he goes getting himself killed. He was supposed to be the symbol of hope, the number 1 hero. That damn nerd has always been getting too far ahead of himself, and you know it.
His voice shook with every breath, his head hung solemnly. Hands clenched into fists as he took a deep breath.
I could never beat him. I could never win fair and square in a match against him without that damn nerd holding back on me.
He turned to push past Kirishima, looking down at Deku's freshly covered grave, dropping to his knees at the foot of it, fingers digging into the topsoil.
Why'd you have to do it? Why?
Katsuki roared, head hanging in a mix of sadness, anger, and guilt.
Why did you run off ahead like a damn Deku? You knew what was going to happen to you. This whole time you knew.
Tears streamed down the blonde's cheeks, fingers digging deeper into the soil beneath him. There were so many things he regretted, so many things he hadn't gotten to say.
Deku, damn it. You damn nerd, you're always doing this to me. Never giving me a chance to say how I feel before you go and do something to piss me off again.
His words choked out between broken sobs as the crowd slowly started to disperse, leaving the blonde alone with Kirishima and Inko both. The green-haired woman knelt down as best she could and wrapped her arms around Katsuki tightly, petting the top of his head as he gripped onto her black coat, sobbing wholeheartedly.
I never got to tell him I was sorry for everything that happened in middle school, for pushing him away so many times. I never got to tell him how happy I was that he didn't kill himself when I told him to back then.
Katsuki was a snivelling mess. The redhead standing over the two stayed quiet. His normal carefree expression was now that of a beaten and broken man. Listening to his dearest friend break so much over the loss of Izuku was just something he couldn't handle. This was Bakugo, for God's sake. Bakugo never showed these kind of emotions towards anyone.
He was so close to becoming number one.
Katsuki sunk further into Inko's tightening arms, taking a deep breath as he squeezed his eyes shut tightly, shoulders shaking with every sob that left his chest.
Today would have been the chart reveal. He would have been number one. He would have finally reached his dream. But he had to go off and try to be the perfect hero by himself on our last mission. I should have gone looking for him.
He looked up at Kirishima, and then to Inko as the tears continued to spill from his softened eyes.
It's all my fault. Just like always, I held him back. If I had only been there.
He paused as he looked over at Izuku's headstone.
You damn nerd. It should be me in the ground instead of you. You know that, don't you?
He whispered as he pulled away from Inko, who had stayed quiet until now. That's not true. Neither of you should be in the ground. But he loved you, Katsuki. He risked his life to keep you safe, and he succeeded. He did his job. She whispered to him as Kirishima helped her to her feet. Take your time, Katsuki. I know he would be happy to know that you're here by his side so readily. Stay as long as you feel the need to. That was what he had already planned to do. He knew that in his mind, if he was able to turn back time, it would be him in that casket instead of Izuku. Or maybe neither of them would be dead. But he knows, maybe it was meant to happen this way. Maybe this was the way Izuku wanted things to be. If that was the case, then he had a funny way of showing how he wanted his life to go.
Damn Deku.
Katsuki whispered as he moved to lean against the side of Izuku's headstone in the dirt, just beside the stone, wrapping his arms around his legs, bearing his head away from prying eyes as the sky slowly clouded over, before drops of cold rain began to patter down on top of his head.